Hey everyone, I've been sitting on this for a while, but it's time to get it off my chest. It's a bit of a roller coaster, so buckle up. I guess I'll start by introducing myself, though I'm sure many of you reading this might already have an inkling of where this is going. I'm 28, and I've always been the kind of person who keeps to themselves, never one to rock the boat, never one to stir up drama. You could say I was the quiet one in the family. And by family, I mean my mom, my younger sister, and me. My mom's always been complicated, but that's a story for another time. But it all started a few months ago when my sister, Amy, asked me for a favor. It wasn't anything outrageous, just the usual. Can you babysit my kids for a bit? I'm drowning here. And like always, I said yes. I was the dependable older sister, the one who'd show up when everyone else bailed. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way she asked. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her voice. Or maybe I was just fed up with constantly being the one to put my life on pause for everyone else. I've always been the one who bends over backward. I didn't have the luxury of saying no. Not to my mom, not to Amy. But that day I did say no. You see, I had plans that night. I hadn't had a moment to myself in weeks, and I was finally going to take it. I was going to see a movie, grab some food, just breathe. For once, I was going to put myself first. When I told Amy I couldn't babysit, I expected a little disappointment, maybe a bit of irritation, but nothing too crazy. I didn't expect her to react the way she did. She was furious, like genuinely angry. I hadn't seen her this upset in years. And okay, I get it. I was the one who had always helped her out before. But the thing was, I just couldn't anymore. It wasn't that I didn't love my niece and nephew. I did. I really did. But I was drained. Mentally, physically, emotionally. And then, she called the cops. I couldn't believe it at first. My own sister, calling the police on me over babysitting. It was insane. The whole situation escalated so quickly, I couldn't even process what was happening. One minute we're arguing in the kitchen, and the next, I hear the doorbell ring. There's a knock, I open it, and there's an officer standing there, asking if everything's okay. Apparently, my sister told them I'd refused to help, and was being difficult. The officer didn't seem to know what to make of it, but after a few minutes of me explaining how everything blew out of proportion, he left. He was nice about it, I guess, but the whole thing felt humiliating. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about babysitting. It was about so much more. I didn't realize it at the time, but this moment would be the spark that ignited everything. The simmering tension between me and Amy, the years of unspoken resentments, the years of being the good sister, the responsible one, the one who always said yes, even when I didn't want to, and the one who everyone else could lean on while they all got to live their lives. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of what would unravel a lot more than just a simple disagreement over childcare. What followed next? Well, you'll see. The days after that incident were awkward, to say the least. I tried to act like everything was fine, but my mind kept circling back to that moment with the officer at the door. I kept asking myself, how did we get here? Was I really in the wrong for not babysitting for once? It felt like a small thing, but the way Amy reacted, it made me question everything. For the next few weeks, I didn't hear much from her. I thought maybe things had cooled off. I was wrong. One evening, my mom called me. She was concerned. Amy told me you refused to help with the kids, she said, her voice tight with worry. Why didn't you help her, honey? You know she's struggling. She really needs you. I had to bite my tongue to keep from snapping. The whole conversation felt like I was back in high school, trying to explain myself to a parent who didn't get it. I know she's struggling, Mom, but I've got my own stuff to deal with. I can't keep dropping everything every time she asks. I'm tired. I need to take care of myself. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. My mom didn't say much after that. She just told me she'd talked to Amy and hung up. I should have been relieved. I should have felt like I stood up for myself, but I didn't. It felt like I was being pulled in two directions, one telling me to protect myself, and the other telling me to keep being the person everyone relied on. The person who always gave, until there was nothing left to give. But what really got me was when Amy reached out to me again. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was doing. No. Instead, she demanded an explanation. She texted me one night, "Why are you being like this? Why are you punishing me for needing help?" That line, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Punishing me? I wasn't punishing her. I was just trying to live my life. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't about babysitting at all. This was about control. Amy had always leaned on me. She expected me to always be there, to always make sacrifices. But when I needed space, when I needed to breathe, it was like I betrayed her. And it wasn't just her. I started to see this pattern in our family. My mom had always leaned on me too. I was the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who kept everything together. It's how I'd been raised. I'd never been allowed to just be me. The minute I started pulling away, pulling back, I was the one who was wrong. I was the one who needed to fix things. The weight of it all started to get unbearable. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was being selfish. But then I'd think about everything I'd done for them. All the sacrifices, all the times I'd put myself last, and no one had even noticed. The worst part? The guilt. It gnawed at me like a persistent ache in the back of my mind. Every time Amy or my mom called, I felt like I was letting them down. But at the same time, the resentment was building. I wanted to scream, "You don't get it. You've never let me live my own life." Things came to a head when I found out Amy had been telling everyone that I was being difficult and unsupportive. She was telling everyone. It was as though I was the villain in a story I didn't even know I was a part of. I was shocked, honestly. But more than that, I was furious. How could she twist the situation like this? How could she make me look like the bad guy when all I'd done was nothing? It wasn't until I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, that I really understood the extent of it. She'd heard the news about me, and when she asked how I was doing, I had to hold back my tears. It felt like everyone had turned on me, like I was the one who had done something wrong when I hadn't. I had just stopped. But I wasn't going to let this go. Not anymore. I decided to confront Amy. I wasn't going to let her control me or make me feel guilty anymore. So one evening I called her. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked when she picked up, my voice steady but filled with frustration. "Telling everyone that I'm being difficult? I'm not the one who's been unfair. I've been there for you my whole life, Amy. But I'm not going to keep doing it if you're just going to treat me like this." She was quiet for a moment, then her voice cracked. "I didn't mean it like that. I just need you. I'm sorry, okay? I don't know what to do anymore." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was so much history, so much unspoken pain between us. I didn't know how to just forgive her like that. And that's when I realized something important. This wasn't just about a babysitting request. This was about boundaries, about standing up for myself when no one else ever had. It wasn't going to be easy, and I didn't know where this would end. But I knew I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for their comfort. It was time to take control of my life. I thought that conversation with Amy would bring some closure. Maybe a fresh start, maybe a heartfelt apology, a mutual understanding. But if anything, it only opened the floodgates to more tension. It felt like we were circling each other in a battle neither of us wanted, yet both of us couldn't escape. In the days that followed, I kept replaying our conversation in my head. Her words, her tone, "I just need you." I'd heard that before, so many times. But the truth was, she needed me the way a drowning person needs a life raft, without ever learning how to swim on their own. And I wasn't sure I could be that raft anymore. The worst part, Amy was still acting like nothing had happened. She didn't apologize in any meaningful way. She just expected me to fall in line, to keep being that dependable, selfless sister who never said no. And I just couldn't. It wasn't until the next weekend that everything really came to a head. It started with a text, a simple, innocuous message that said, "Hey, can you pick up the kids tomorrow? I have a thing I can't get out of." It would have been easy to just ignore it, but I didn't. The anger, the frustration, it all just boiled over. I'd been keeping it in for weeks, pretending to be fine, pretending like things weren't building up. I was done. I texted back, "No, I'm not doing it anymore." For a moment, I thought maybe she'd just back off. Maybe she'd understand that I was serious. But no. Instead, the floodgates opened again. She called me, and when I picked up, it was like I was listening to a different person. Her voice was sharp, almost pleading, as if this was a crisis. "Why are you doing this to me? Why can't you just help me like you always have?" She sounded like she was dying for my help. But the truth was, I'd heard this plea too many times before. It wasn't real. It was manipulation. I didn't even let her finish. "You don't get it, Amy. You don't get that I'm not your backup anymore. I'm not your damn safety net. You've never learned how to ask for help without expecting it to be free, without expecting me to sacrifice myself." There was silence on the other end. I knew she was processing what I'd said, probably shocked, and maybe even a little hurt. But that's the thing about people like Amy. They only understand the word no when you say it loud enough. When you finally have the courage to stop being the person they can walk all over. She tried to talk over me, but I wasn't having it anymore. "This isn't about me not caring for you, Amy. It's about me finally standing up for myself. It's about me not being your doormat anymore." She didn't speak for a long time after that, and I could hear the hurt in her silence. But at that moment, I didn't care. I couldn't keep bending to her will, couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness just to keep the peace. I was done being the peacekeeper. Finally, she muttered, "I don't need you then. Fine. But don't expect me to come running when you realize how selfish you're being." The words stung, but they didn't land the way she thought they would. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing her. I wasn't afraid of her guilt trips or her manipulation. I had already lost myself in this relationship, and it was time to find who I really was again. I hung up, heart pounding, breath heavy. But I was also free. And that was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, as I was picking up groceries, I got a message from Mom. And just like everything else with my family, it wasn't just a simple message. It was loaded with tension, guilt, and expectations. "You really hurt Amy. You need to fix this. I don't understand why you're being so stubborn." I could feel my blood start to boil. Was I really the one in the wrong here? Was I supposed to just keep bending until I broke? Was I supposed to let them keep walking all over me? No, I was done. But that wasn't the end of the emotional toll it took. That night, I tried to sleep, but the weight of everything, the guilt, the anger, the resentment, kept me awake. It was like a constant buzzing in my head, an itch I couldn't scratch. I tried to rationalize it. I'm standing up for myself. I'm not the villain here. But it didn't make it any easier. I couldn't stop thinking about how my family would view me now. Would they ever understand? Would they ever accept that I wasn't the same person I was when I was younger? Or would they just see me as a problem, someone who was too selfish to help anymore? Would they even care? And that's when I realized I couldn't fix them anymore. I couldn't keep trying to put the pieces of this broken family together when no one else was willing to pick up their own mess. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself to make sure they were okay when I wasn't. And yet, the thought of losing my family, it hurt. Even if I was right, even if I was finally standing up for myself, the emotional cost was real. There were moments when I felt like I had just crossed a line I couldn't come back from. But I wasn't turning back. I couldn't. The breaking point had been reached. There was no going back to the way things were before. The week after that conversation with Amy was a blur. I kept myself busy, working, exercising, distracting myself. But the quiet moments, the ones when I was alone with my thoughts, were the hardest. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the fight, her angry words echoing in my head. "Don't expect me to come running when you realize how selfish you're being." It stung. It stung in a way I didn't expect. I kept telling myself I had done the right thing, that I had finally set boundaries, but it didn't make the loneliness any less crushing. There were days when I almost gave in, when I almost texted her to apologize, to fix things, to go back to the way we were before all this. I thought, maybe if I just tell her I was wrong, we can pretend this never happened. Maybe we can go back to being close again. But I knew better now. It wasn't about fixing things anymore. It was about standing my ground. And standing my ground meant feeling the weight of the consequences. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was tossing and turning, thinking about how things had shifted so drastically in such a short period of time. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m., and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was from my mom. "Amy is asking if you're coming to Thanksgiving dinner. It's just the family." She said, "You're still invited, but I don't know if you should come if you're going to be like this." I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Thanksgiving. The one holiday we used to spend together as a family. It had always been so simple, so familiar, but now it felt like a battlefield. A battlefield I wasn't sure I wanted to walk into. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to just let it all go, apologize, and pretend none of it had ever happened. But then I remembered the conversation, the real conversation we had, the one where I finally stopped being the yes person, the one where I said no. I remembered how it felt to stand up for myself, to say the words I'd been too afraid to say for years, and I realized I couldn't go back. So, I texted back, "Thanks for letting me know, but I won't be coming. I need some space." It wasn't the easiest decision, but it was the right one for me. I wasn't ready to face the aftermath of my decision. I wasn't ready to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. And honestly, I wasn't sure when I'd be ready. Maybe I never would be. The days after that felt like a slow unraveling. The family dynamic I had known for so long was disintegrating in front of my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Amy didn't reach out again, neither did Mom. The silence was deafening. For the first time in my life, I didn't have the constant noise of family drama in the background, but it was an eerie quiet, one that made me question if I'd made the right call. I kept asking myself, what if this is the end of it? What if they never speak to me again? But at the same time, there was this new sense of clarity. I started to feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions for myself, without constantly thinking about how they would affect everyone else. I wasn't a villain. I wasn't selfish. I was just trying to live my own life. One afternoon, about a week later, I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, sipping coffee and watching the rain fall. It was a peaceful moment, a rare one in the storm of emotions I had been riding. I had a sudden thought, maybe I don't need them to understand. Maybe that's what this was about. I had spent my entire life trying to make everyone else understand me, trying to get them to see my side, to make them care about my feelings. But in the end, that was never the point. The point was that I was the one who needed to understand myself. I was the one who needed to put myself first for once. As the days passed, I stopped feeling so much guilt. I stopped feeling like I was betraying my family, even though I knew they might see it that way. Instead, I started to feel something else. Empowered. I wasn't trapped by their expectations anymore. I wasn't stuck in that endless loop of pleasing everyone around me and sacrificing myself in the process. Then, one evening, I was out for a walk, trying to clear my head, when I ran into my mom. It wasn't planned, and I hadn't expected it. But there she was, standing on the corner, looking uncertain. Her arms crossed. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about you needing space. Maybe I didn't really understand what you were going through." Her words were quiet, almost tentative, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, she was finally seeing me. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft. "Maybe I've been too hard on you, but you're my daughter, and I just want to make sure you're okay." It wasn't an apology I had expected. It wasn't the grand gesture I thought I needed, but it was enough. "I'm okay, Mom," I said, offering a small, genuine smile. "I just need to figure out what that looks like for me, without the pressure." And she nodded, like she understood. We stood there for a few moments, just looking at each other, both of us trying to navigate the awkwardness. But for the first time, there was no anger, no resentment, just understanding. Maybe we weren't there yet, but this was a step. The weeks that followed that encounter with my mom felt like a slow, steady unraveling. There were no dramatic confrontations, no explosive arguments. Instead, there was a strange quiet that settled between us, a quiet that was almost peaceful, yet unsettling in its own way. I'd grown used to the noise, to the constant bickering, and to the emotional pull of my family's needs, but now it was just silence, and I didn't know whether to embrace it or fight against it. Thanksgiving came and went without me. I spent it alone, by choice. I made myself a small dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and watched old movies on the couch. It was lonely, yes, but for the first time, I didn't feel the pressure to please anyone. I didn't feel obligated to show up and pretend everything was okay just to avoid conflict. For the first time, I allowed myself to simply be. But then came Christmas. That was when things got real. That was when the true test came. I had been dreading it, to be honest. All the holiday gatherings, the family photos, the presents, everything that once felt so effortless, so natural, was now tainted by this rift, this space I had created between myself and the people I loved. My mom called a few days before Christmas. Her voice was soft, but I could hear the underlying hope in her words. She asked if I was coming home for the holidays. I could tell she was nervous, like she didn't know how to approach me anymore. There was an unspoken question hanging in the air. Would I come back? Would I forgive them? I hesitated. A part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to return to the familiar chaos, to pretend nothing had changed. But I knew better now. I had learned something crucial over the past few months. I had to be honest with myself first. "No, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not ready for that yet. I need more time." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a brief moment, I thought she might cry. I almost expected her to beg me to come home, to guilt me into returning. But she didn't. Instead, I heard her take a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with a quiet acceptance. "I understand," she said. "Take your time, honey, but know that we're here whenever you're ready." And in that moment, something shifted. There was no anger, no frustration, just understanding. She wasn't forcing me to forgive her. She wasn't trying to make me feel guilty. She was just accepting where I was, even if it wasn't where she wanted me to be. The rest of the holiday season passed in a blur. I didn't reach out to Amy. I didn't feel the need to. I focused on myself, on my work, on my health, on the small, quiet moments that I had been starved for. I took a trip to the mountains to get away for a few days, and for the first time in years, I truly felt at peace. But then, something unexpected happened. A few weeks into the new year, I got a message from Amy. It was short and simple, just a few lines. "I've been thinking. I know I've been harsh. I don't want to lose you, okay? I miss you. Let's talk when you're ready." My heart caught in my chest. The coldness between us wasn't gone, but it was starting to thaw. There was no demand, no guilt trip, just a genuine attempt to reconnect. And in that moment, I realized something important. Maybe we weren't as broken as I thought. I took my time before responding. I thought about what I wanted to say, what I needed to say. It wasn't going to be an instant fix, but I was ready to start the process of healing. So, I wrote back, "I miss you too. Let's talk soon." A few days later, Amy called. I could tell she was nervous, like she didn't know if I was going to lash out or if I'd be distant. But when we spoke, it wasn't like before. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a confrontation. It was two people talking honestly about their feelings, about the mistakes they'd made, about what they needed from each other moving forward. "I'm sorry for putting so much on you," she said, her voice quiet, almost ashamed. "I never realized how much you were sacrificing. I was selfish, and I'm sorry." And for the first time in years, I felt like Amy saw me. She really saw me, and that was enough for me to forgive her. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice softer than I expected. I should have said no earlier. I should have set boundaries sooner. But I think we're both learning, aren't we? We both laughed, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything was normal again. But the truth was, things weren't going to be the same. Not because we couldn't fix it, but because we didn't need to fix everything. What we needed was to understand each other, to give each other space, and to grow. And that was okay. That was more than okay. That was exactly what I needed. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't a storybook ending where everything magically falls into place. But it was real. It was raw. It was human. And in the end, that was the most important thing. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I wasn't living for anyone else. I wasn't waiting for approval. I was just living for me. And that was enough. Story 2. I was 7 months pregnant when my parents evicted me for non-payment of rent. After everything they did to me, they now want to meet my son. I am a 28-year-old woman who gave birth to my kid around 2 months ago. I've been sharing a friend's flat with her. Although it's somewhat little, this place is a better place to live than my parents' home. I am a single mother. My child's father is my ex-boyfriend. However, I gave him the option to leave when I informed him that I intended to keep the baby, and he decided to go. He has no desire to be involved in the child's life. Although I did request child support, our son's birth was the catalyst for the payments to begin. According to the conditions of our agreement, he would only be required to pay child support once the kid was born, until he reached 18, and only if paternity confirmed. Other than his providing the monthly sum we agreed upon, we don't communicate. Since I work as a freelance photographer, I was unable to return to work after the 5th month due to several issues. Thus, I was forced to rely on my savings. I asked my parents if I may stay with them till the birth of my son after leaving my leased residence. Despite their disapproval of my professional decision, my parents consented to let me live with them while I was pregnant. Thus, we don't really get along. Since they made no mention of rent, I thought that I would be living there for free, which was a lot better option than having to pay rent each month when I wasn't working. For the first 2 months, I lived with them without any issues, and it was actually very nice. Since I was the one in the family using the most food, I did assist in my own way by paying for groceries and helping with the electricity and water bills. Even though I was making an effort to avoid being a freeloader, it wasn't enough. My parents told me in the first week of my 7th month that they wanted me to pay the rent, but didn't want to discuss it with me since it was humiliating. When I first asked them if I could move in with them, I was a little surprised because they hadn't mentioned that. I assumed that the whole purpose of living with them would be to avoid paying rent, but they assumed that I would. They hadn't even considered the possibility that I might want to live there for free because I was pregnant and unemployed. They didn't want to talk to me about it because they believed that I would ultimately pay and that discussing money was tacky. I explained to them that the only reason I would move back in with them was because I needed to save money, since I knew my pregnancy wouldn't be easy, and I couldn't really afford to pay the rent right now without depleting my savings. Therefore, I needed to know that I could rely on my funds in the event of any future medical problems. I did have health insurance though. Being cautious was always a good idea, which is why I was being a bit too frugal. However, it was clear to me that they did not want a freeloader living with them. I so promised them that I would pay them the full sum I owed them in one go when my baby was born, and I returned to work. All they had to do was let me stay with them for free until I returned to work and was able to pay the rent. I was unable to negotiate this with other landlords, but because these were my own parents, I anticipated them to be somewhat understanding, and I most certainly intended to pay them as soon as I could. My parents were dubious, and, after some consideration, informed me that they couldn't just let me live there for free, even if I'm not a thief. I would have to pay the rent if I wanted to remain with them, or else I would have to move out. I attempted to argue with my own parents, but it felt awful that they were kicking me out for something like this. I even informed them that if they forced me to sign a legal document, I would do so. The promise that I would reimburse them as soon as I returned to work or even as soon as my child support payments began to arrive. However, they refused to budge and informed me that I could either leave or pay them immediately. Despite my best efforts to persuade them, I was ultimately forced to leave and move in with a friend. Despite her own lack of wealth, she was gracious enough to let me live with her. She assured me that it didn't matter and made sure I was comfortable, despite my assurance that I wouldn't be in her hair for very long. When I lived with them, she took even better care of me than my parents did. I'm really thankful for my buddy, since I would have likely been in serious trouble if it weren't for her. I can afford to divide the rent and contribute now that the checks for the child support payments are being paid, and I'll be searching for a place of my own once I'm well enough to return to work. It wasn't like either of my parents were impoverished and couldn't afford to let me live with them for a bit without paying rent, so I was furious about what they did. My mom works at a marketing business, and my dad is a banker, so they certainly had plenty of money. After they ejected me, I didn't talk to them, since they were being egotistical and a little frugal. Even after I had gone, they made an effort to communicate with me normally, but I didn't answer their calls or texts. After what had transpired, I just had nothing to say to them and was really unsure of what they had to say to me. Thus, we had no communication. I've been writing a lot about my son on the internet since he was eventually born. Not his face or anything, but everyone is aware that I'm now a mother. Numerous family members have reached out to offer their congratulations, and one of my cousins has even paid me a visit. My parents contacted me to inquire whether I was finally hosting guests after my cousin visited me last week and shared a picture of it on social media. They contacted me after I failed to respond to that SMS as well, and they kept calling until I ultimately did. They demanded to know why I wasn't speaking to them when I answered the phone. I didn't want to talk to them, so I told them that it was cruel of them to throw me out of their house because I couldn't pay the rent for a few months. They became defensive and said that I was unfair to expect them to just let me live with them without paying for my living expenses, even though I did. Even if it wasn't much, I did, and I should recognize and acknowledge it as an adult. They then advised me to put everything behind me as they wanted to see their grandson, and it was all in the past. The fact that they were handling things so nonchalantly already made me rather angry. I informed them that I was an adult and could make my own choices when they expressed a desire to see their grandchild. Since I was upset and didn't want to see them, they had to accept and realize that I had determined they wouldn't be seeing the grandchild anytime soon. They continued messaging and claiming that I was overreacting since they didn't think what they had done was that big of an issue. So I ended the conversation and tried to ignore them. Even though I didn't enjoy it at the time, they insisted that it was all in the past and that I should move on, which annoyed me. Furthermore, I have no reason to accept it at this time. In addition, I have the freedom to decide whether or not to go on, and if I don't, I won't. I spent some time arguing with them via SMS. I lost it when they stated they would speak with me when I was acting a bit less insane. I became so enraged that I went online and wrote a tirade about how my parents had always disapproved of my professional decisions and had evicted me from their home when I was very pregnant because they wanted to play a practical joke on me. They therefore deceived me into believing that living with them would be free of rent. When they discovered that I couldn't pay, they abruptly threw me a curveball 2 months later and forced me to leave, just to make me seem foolish until I got here. Everything was well until I included a few of their co-workers in the article so they could all read it and learn more about my parents. And I think that's where I overreached myself. All of my family members now oppose me and think I should apologize to my parents. I've discussed this with a few of my friends, but they don't believe it was that horrible because my parents were attempting to gaslight me and didn't stop, even though they could see I was obviously under a lot of stress. They even hinted that I was insane for reacting the way I did. After over 3 hours, during which a few individuals did see and even liked the post, I removed it. It has been nearly a week since I made it. My parents have been silent about it, which is worse than their speaking out about their feelings. Only my family members have discussed it with me. To be honest, I would much prefer just argue with them to end this, but I don't feel any better about what I did if I keep quiet. My friends and family seem to have a very strong point, and I honestly don't know if I should apologize to them or not. Personally, I'm utterly blank and don't know what to do. To find out what you people believe I should be doing about this, I've come to Reddit. Although I don't feel awful about posting it, I regret identifying their coworkers because they had nothing to do with it, and I unnecessarily included them in my family issue, which must have been embarrassing for my parents at work. I'm TA for mentioning my parents in a post about my parents' coworkers. One update. I ultimately apologized to my parents for this, for tagging their colleagues in the post. Not for the post itself. That was unjust because I didn't need to do it, and I only did it out of resentment. They still haven't responded to the SMS I gave them yesterday. The relative who paid me a visit last week was the only connection I currently have with my aunts, uncles, and cousins. Because everyone else is so furious, he is the only one that continues to communicate with me. I pulled that post down within hours of posting it. And this isn't even about them, so it seems a bit unfair that he informed me that the only thing people are talking about in my family text thread is that post. And they've been talking about it for days. I don't see why my parents have so many different perspectives on this. It's between me and them. I was going to apologize to the rest of my family, but because I didn't say anything negative about them, I don't think they need or deserve it. I apologized to the folks I did screw with, and now it's up to my parents to decide whether or not to forgive me. However, my family should keep their lips quiet because they have nothing to do with this. I can only say that I'm incredibly relieved that my cousin is on my side, since the things being said about me are quite terrible. He showed me a handful of screenshots of whatever conversations have been taking place regarding me and the family group. Furthermore, it all reveals more about their personalities than mine. In addition to making incredibly hurtful remarks about me being a single mother, there has been a lot of conjecture on the specific reasons why my ex left me. To put it simply, there is nothing positive to say about me in any of the hypotheses. They only want to speak about how I must have turned the man off and how I'm to blame for my son's fatherless upbringing, since I'm evidently such a pain in the ass. They feel sorry for my parents because they would never have to cope with someone like me. They are obviously simply chatting about me because they have nothing better to do with their time. And it's all just a bunch of bullshit. I was actually quite close to these individuals while I was growing up, so it's sad. At least 3 times a month, our close-knit family would get together. They are the same individuals who have watched me mature, and now they are disparaging me based on a single post in which I dared to express the truth. Nothing about it seems fair. Even worse, my parents are included in this SMS discussion. None of them have attempted to defend me or accept responsibility, and they don't think there is anything wrong with what the others are saying about me. It's not as though they're not doing anything. However, they don't speak poorly of me or defend me. Sometimes, anytime someone makes a terrible joke about me, they do send me laughing emojis and other things. I'm so disappointed in everyone, and it's just a pretty ugly business. Update 2. I apologized to my parents for that post 4 days ago. When they eventually contacted me back a few hours ago, they stated they didn't care about the post since they were disappointed with me anyhow and weren't shocked that I had carried things this far. After I did the right thing and apologized to them, I felt it was a little harsh. However, I also expected the same thing from them, as they told me. Thus, I'm not shocked either. I didn't want people to think that I had apologized for just posting it. They certainly need to be called out for everything. So I clarified in my response that I was just sorry for naming their coworkers in it and nothing else. For a time, I could see them typing, but they never sent me a text. Instead, they called. My father talked to me. He informed me that my mother and he were quite dissatisfied in my actions, particularly after I mentioned that they were attempting to make fun of me for my professional decisions. It was unjust of me to publish about it and make them appear terrible, he said, because that hadn't been their aim at all. They informed me that they were quite embarrassed by the amount of talk that had been spread about them at their separate places of employment following that article. It was really offensive that my mother had even been singled out by a few of her co-workers and had received reprimands from her supervisor. I pulled down the post within a few hours of publishing it, and I apologized to them for that. They must accept what occurred, since I can't precisely go back in time and change what I did. Additionally, they were really cruel to me during my pregnancy. However, I had accepted that and moved on from them. Even though they were the ones who had me move out during my pregnancy, which caused me a great deal of stress and anguish, they were the ones who later attempted to get in touch with me because they wanted to see their grandchild. They then attempted to portray me as insane for being upset with them, even though I felt that what they did to me was worse than what I did to them. They never expressed regret for any of it. Therefore, they should consider themselves extremely fortunate to have ever been apologized to. My dad wasn't happy about it and said he could have sued me for slander if he had wanted to, but he forgiven me since I was his only daughter, and I should be thankful for that. I simply expected him to feel the same way after I expressed my gratitude to him. For after I became an adult, they treated me like a second-class citizen, despite my having apologized to him and my mother. We had a lot of arguments in the past when I first informed them that I wanted to pursue photography instead of attending college. They used to say many terrible things to me, such as that they hoped I got lost and never returned, and that they wished I had never been born. In my post, I hadn't brought up those points. They most likely wouldn't have anyone on their side at the moment if I had. Even they need to be thankful that I didn't fully expose them, in my opinion. After that, my dad started yelling at me, making it impossible to carry on the conversation. I hung up and blocked him, since I didn't see the point in arguing with him any longer, if he wasn't even willing to discuss. I have no idea whether they will make an effort to contact me again, but if they do, I won't hold back. Update 3. I haven't posted anything in a week, since they haven't made an effort to get in touch with me since that phone conversation with my father. I'm going to assume that they have completely given up on me. And because I'm already rather stressed out, it's a big relief. I don't require any more of that. My cousin confirmed that they had been much more active after that phone conversation when I asked whether they had been discussing me in the group. My parents are now the ones who keep bringing it up, only to disparage me. Even though my relatives had already moved on from that post and the subject of me and my ex-boyfriend and other things, I suppose I become their favorite conversation starter, and they talk about me all the time, even when they're not speaking to me, so I'm always on their mind. It's unfortunate that there isn't a valid justification. I think it's amazing that they managed to make themselves seem like the victims, even though they were the ones who evicted their own daughter, who is pregnant. They were the ones that gaslighted me and continued to push me, and it became a major thing when I eventually lost it and made a dumb little post, and they will always be the victims. I know there is nothing I can do about it, so I just have to accept it and let people trash talk me, even though it's all really annoying and absurd, because they lack the courage to speak to me directly. They are ultimately doing it behind my back. I have wonderful pals, and my cousin supports me. In addition, I'm expecting to return to work in a few days to get my life back on track, so I won't be worrying about any of these unimportant individuals and will instead concentrate on myself. Update 4. Thanks to some strange miracle, I was able to resume working today. My folks decided to pay me a visit at my friend's house today. There was no one at home because my buddy was at work and I had left my son at another friend's house for a few hours. Additionally, I avoid checking my phone while working unless there is an emergency. My parents were waiting outside her apartment, but I was completely unaware of it. For over an hour before they made the decision to go, they continued messaging me, my mom, because my dad is banned. It wasn't until I finished my work and it was time to return home that I realized it. They were traveling to meet their grandchild for the first time, and I didn't even have the decency to be at home to greet them. All of the messages spoke about how this was so offensive to them. They said that I was a bad mother, in addition to being a bad daughter, because I took my son to work as they believed I did. In one text, they called me a terrible person. Then in the next, they talked about how eager they were to see me in their grandchild, and how unjust it was that I was denying them that chance. These texts were all quite entitled and bipolar. I find it incomprehensible that they would expect me to allow them to come see me or see my son, after all of the things they had said about me and to me behind my back. To be honest, I'm simply relieved that I wasn't home. When I originally went, I regret not even informing them where I was going. At the time, I wasn't thinking clearly, but I definitely shouldn't have done that. However, this now serves as much more motivation for me to leave as soon as possible. I don't want to bother my buddy anymore, yet I will miss her, and I'm confident that my parents will make an effort to see me once more if they find out where I live. Furthermore, I don't want to cause my pal any problems. The fifth update. Hello everyone. Last week, I moved into my own apartment. Yes, it did happen at last, and I am very grateful for everything in my life. Although it made my buddy sad to see me depart, she understood. She won't be able to attend any of my son's midnight sobbing sessions, I'm afraid. Even though my own apartment is much smaller, this is all I can afford at the moment, and I'm confident that if I keep working, I'll quickly return to my previous situation. A month has passed since my previous post, and I didn't want my parents around, so I banned them on every platform when they attempted to visit. Since then, they haven't made another attempt to contact me personally, and I'm crossing my fingers that they won't be able to track me down. In addition to changing my phone number, I informed my buddy that she would not have to open the door if my parents ever visited her apartment. She is allowed to phone the police if they attempt to disturb her. All I can hope is that it doesn't get to that point. Now that my son and I are alone, we will undoubtedly succeed. I simply have no doubt about that. Story 3. My parents attempted to humiliate me in front of family members for not providing for them and my conceited brother. This is what took place. I'm a 33-year-old man who just went to my cousin's wedding. During the after-party with my parents, there was an incident. We try to avoid talking to each other as much as possible, since my parents and I don't get along. My younger brother Jack, a 29-year-old man who is essentially the golden child, is the cause. He received everything he asked for, and nothing was ever his fault when I was growing up. But that wasn't the case for me. Additionally, he got more entitled and spoiled as he grew older. I'm not precisely in contact with him either. When my parents informed me that they would not be covering my college expenses and that I would have to make all the arrangements myself, I severed ties with them. We have been polite to one another at family get-togethers in the recent past, but that was a long time ago. Even when we meet, Jack and I never talk. And because I don't believe he's the type of man I would want to talk to, I'm fine with that. Despite being an adult kid, he still resides with his parents and spends most of his weekends playing computer games with his online pals while feeling depleted and drained after a beer can. As I mentioned, I went to my cousin's wedding a few days ago, and following the ceremony, my family and I basically sat about talking and drinking like everyone else. I thought it was a bit odd that my family, who generally attempt to avoid me, suddenly joined the conversation, but I didn't give it much attention. Furthermore, there were many others seated around us, so once they were seated, the talk wasn't really private, so it wasn't like I could tell them to stop bothering me. When my dad asked me how my employment was going, the topic abruptly shifted to me. I was just promoted and given a sizable raise at my job as a banker. I assured him that things was going well and finished my sentence there, but my parents were unwilling to drop it. Last weekend, I celebrated it with a few of my friends by going out to a bar, but it's none of my family's business. My mother then inquired as to whether I had anything more I would want to share with the family. No, I said. My dad ordered me to stop acting since he knew about the rise and promotion. Although I was a little taken aback, I didn't feel comfortable talking about this with so many of my family members around. I tried to excuse myself so I could go to the well, but I really just wanted to get the hell out of there, so I told him that I didn't believe it was any of their concern. My father, however, instructed me to take a seat again so that we could discuss this as a family. I became irritated when he stated that since I didn't consider him to be my family in the slightest, and I'm very certain they didn't think of me as family either. And they confirmed my correctness when my father said that despite my high income, I was unable to support and give back to my parents, who had put in a great deal of effort to raise me and provide for all of my needs as a youngster. And I was being very selfish and disrespectful, turning my back on them now that they were about to retire. Since they understood they weren't supposed to be involved in this talk, all of my other relatives were either staring at their phones or the ground. My parents made a blatant effort to degrade me and coerce me into giving them money. And I understood why they also needed it. You know, my brother is still dependent on our parents to support him because he does not have a work. His way of life is not particularly economical. He wants to buy every latest gadget because he considers himself a tech geek or something. And he wants to go out partying and drinking with his pals about every other weekend. Additionally, these items have a price, which my parents are undoubtedly finding difficult to pay. Now that they are both getting near to retirement, they must begin to consider their post-retirement plans. They can't really keep helping my brother indefinitely, and I was aware that they were attempting to make me seem bad in front of my family in order to get me to pay the money so they could look good. They would then use it against me and keep allowing the golden child to continue. I wasn't going to fall for it, though. Despite my feelings of embarrassment, I chose to take revenge and punish them the same way they were treating me. When I asked them to pay for my college tuition all those years ago, they laughed in my face, so I yelled at them and brought it up. Back then, they had informed me that they only had enough money to send one child to college, and I was not that child. I kid you not, I had to take care of myself. When I had brought it up to them, they had genuinely laughed, as though I had made a joke. But because I was essentially a joke to them, I suppose that was fair. But now that they saw I was making money and my brother wasn't, they wanted me to help out the family, even though I understood this was simply a ploy to keep giving money. The neck of my brother. I brought up that event and informed them that they had only allowed me to remain in their home and support me until I became 18, which was essentially the very least they could do for me. They had also not spent a single dime more on me than was required, and they followed the law's requirements rather than their own desires. Therefore, they had to quit pretending that they did it out of obligation rather than out of goodwill. Unbeknownst to me, I started to cry while discussing it and had to go use the restroom to avoid crying in front of them. I simply didn't want to make them feel that way. The crowd had dispersed by the time I emerged, and there were no longer any people seated there. I then left and returned home. My brother contacted me and told me something that really blew my mind, so I tried not to think about it for the following few days. It seems that my family had been chatting among themselves about our altercation at the wedding. Sadly, word had gotten out that my parents didn't want anyone to know about this big secret, that I would have to pay for college on my own. They had already borrowed money from a few of their relatives, claiming they needed it to pay for both my brothers and my tuition. Several years have gone by, and they still haven't refunded the money, despite their commitment to do so within a few years. They were actually rather comfortable, but whenever those relatives contacted them, they said they were still having financial difficulties. They would simply be too frugal to pay back the money they had borrowed, which they were using to support my brother's lavish lifestyle. Furthermore, my brother informed me that 3 individuals had sued my parents to recover their money after they discovered their falsehoods due to my words at the wedding. Since they thought my parents were having a hard time and didn't want to make things worse, they hadn't done it yet. Nothing, however, was going to stop them now that they were aware of the reality. But because I didn't want to acknowledge that I had been a horrible son in front of so many of my relatives, my brother wanted me to speak with them and persuade them that I had only been lying to save face at the wedding, so that our parents could come up with a way to get them out of trouble. He wanted me to persuade them to drop the case. I rejected, since I felt it was a foolish notion. However, because I put them in this predicament, he and my parents are now requesting that I help them get out of it. For being honest with my family about the fact that my parents had not covered the cost of my college education, just in case they had any more tricks up their sleeve, I decided to share my side of the story online for everyone to see after blocking my brother. Since I'm just giving them the truth, I don't feel guilty about taking the initiative because I had a hunch they would try to play the victim. They should be informed as well, since they may have taken out additional loans from unrelated parties. In a sense, I'm just protecting others and doing good for the planet. My brother and my parents rely on one another to protect them, unlike me, who had to take care of myself almost all the time in that environment. They will now understand my feelings. It's unbelievable to me that my brother believed he could use guilt-tripping and manipulation to get me to lie in order to hide something from my parents. Sincerely, I felt in my heart that most people would concur that I had done nothing wrong, even as I was writing that piece, and the comments I received just confirmed my presumptions. Therefore, I want to thank you all for supporting me and preventing me from doubting myself. Additionally, I will address some of the frequently asked questions that were posted in the comments. To begin with, I have never met these relatives from whom my parents borrowed money, nor do I know them. I'm not sure why they chose to assist my parents, but I suppose it was because they were genuinely kind people, and my parents chose to take advantage of that. That's the only reason I can think of. And I don't believe it's a smart idea to contact them to ask why they handed my parents the money at this particular time. I'm just hoping that these folks have some documentation proving that my parents borrowed the money and plan to pay it back. If not, I doubt they have any case against them, which would be unfortunate for me. A few of you also inquired about my grandparents, and I'm at a loss for words. I never had a close relationship with either of my grandparents. My dad's parents are still living, but my mom's parents died a few years ago. However, I have never communicated with them, and even they believe my brother to be the superior sibling, so it makes no difference. Thus, they just don't matter. My education expenses were not covered by them. No, contrary to what many people think, it was just me. With a little assistance from a few of my friends and their parents, I worked my way through college to cover my tuition. After I obtained my first job, I did finally pay back everyone I had borrowed money from, but I never sought assistance from my parents or any other family members. My parents weren't involved at the time, so I created it alone. Although I was a little let down by that, I am now able to declare with pride that I did it all by myself, and I am quite proud of that. Therefore, I hope that clarifies everything and answers all of your queries concerning my life. I'm not sure what will happen with my brother and mom next, but I'll keep you all updated. I believe that you people are now essentially involved in this. The second update. Well, 2 weeks have passed since my initial post here, and like I mentioned, a few of my relatives are suing my parents for failing to reimburse them. Fortunately, they had evidence. Based on what I heard, my parents are currently facing serious legal issues, but for some reason, they are being naive about it, and rather than concentrating on their defense, they believe it would be wise to target me and attempt to coerce me into supporting them and acknowledging that everything I said at the wedding was a massive lie that I made up to harm their reputation. They had been to see me a few days prior with my brother, most likely to try to scare me or something similar. I can appreciate their desire to make things right by frightening me into lying about myself, since they are aware of how screwed up they are right now, and their only option is to paint me as the villain. Anyway, I almost didn't open my door when they arrived, since I knew it was them. But after a few minutes of my brother's persistent banging, I gave in to their irritation. I didn't want to waste my day on them, so I ordered them to hurry. My father was fairly blunt when he said that they couldn't afford to pay everyone back at once and needed me to buy them some time. Therefore, he asked me to lie to cover for them. Naturally, it would be challenging to keep the secret now that it was out, but for the benefit of our family and our image, he urged me to at least attempt. We didn't even spoken to each other for a long time, so I thought it was very hilarious that they were discussing relatives and such. I'm very certain that in a true family, members at least communicate with one another and don't attempt to control or take advantage of one another. It was painfully clear to me what they were trying to accomplish, so I informed them that I no longer truly considered them family and that they should stop bringing that up so frequently. They were no longer going to try to guilt trip me, and they couldn't emotionally coerce me into supporting their position. Since I already knew the type of individuals they are, and that they will do whatever it takes to achieve what they want, none of their mind tricks were going to work with me. I wasn't going to fall for any of their little ploys. After the emotional blackmail failed, my brother turned to other tactics. In other words, he attempted to coerce me and threatened to upload offensive content to disparage me and terminate my hotshot position if I didn't cooperate. I just informed him that if he did any of that, they could add another lawsuit to their already long list of problems, because I would also be bringing a defamation action against them, which shut him off. It was a very pitiful attempt. However, after everything I had done to the family, my mother became extremely protective and told me that I had no right to attempt to frighten him in this way. Since I hadn't done anything to the family, I didn't enjoy that. By deceiving others and taking out loans from family members to support and assist their golden kid, they had brought this all upon themselves. She made it seem like I was the cause of this, which was just incorrect because I had nothing to do with it. I didn't force them to steal money from their family members, never pay it back, and then make up ludicrous justifications to keep from repaying them for years. I didn't bring up my younger brother to be a conceited, goalless, entitled man who could achieve absolutely nothing. They were solely responsible for that. Therefore, they could reward themselves and keep me out of it if they wanted to give someone a pat on the back for that. After telling my parents all of this, I ordered them to leave my house immediately, since I had more enjoyable and useful things to accomplish with my day off, and they were wasting it. In an attempt to intimidate me, my brother first refused and got all in my face. I thought it was amusing that he stated he was going to make sure I didn't get away with this, since I couldn't imagine what he was going to do. Get his 20-year-old internet weirdos to harass me online or throw his video game controller at me. That really irritated him, and he turned extremely crimson in the face when I urged him to wash his teeth more frequently if he was going to approach people so closely in order to threaten them. I knew that he and my parents were helpless in this situation, so it was rather enjoyable to see him battle to hold back until my mom had to take him away. After years of being singled out by them, I finally had them pleading for assistance, so it seemed like a tremendous success to me. However, I refused to assist them. They would experience the same emotions I did when I begged them to cover my college expenses, and they scoffed in my face. The third update. Hello. So my parents have been visiting me for a few weeks now, and based on what I've heard, things haven't been going well for them. My family members have reported that they have been telling everyone they encounter how difficult it is for them to pay the lawyer and keep up with the expenses. They now also have to worry about how they will repay these individuals, particularly because this is happening at the wrong moment, and they will be retiring in a few years. Of course, the simplest way for parents to help their youngest son contribute to family expenditures would be to force him to obtain a real job and accomplish something with his life. However, since they want to spoil him, they won't do that. He's definitely quite terrible on the inside, which is why they're doing well at that job. Additionally, they have been telling others that I feel horrible about the wedding and the difficulties I caused them. My parents bragged about how I couldn't buy them out, and they apparently felt quite embarrassed by me during the wedding, so they refused my offer to pay for their lawyer out of guilt. A few of my family members discussed it with me and said they weren't sure, but they were pleased by my maturity and generosity. My parents weren't exactly reliable, so I wasn't sure whether attempting to aid them was the wisest course of action. I had to tell them that I had done nothing of the sort that my parents were accusing me of. Whenever one of my family members discusses this with me, I explain to them that what my parents had told them was a flat-out lie. I then give them the truth about what actually transpired, which is that my family came to me and begged me to lie and retract my statements in order to buy them some time. My brother then made an attempt to scare me or do whatever it was he was attempting to do. I haven't decided yet. They don't come out looking awful, since that makes a lot more sense to them than whatever absurd fiction my parents told them. I find it incredible that they still give a damn about how their family members think of them. Even when no one believes it, they continue to attempt to paint me as the antagonist in their tale, despite the fact that they are in a lot of legal problems. Their priorities are quite obvious, I suppose. They literally care more about making me appear awful than anything else. Update: I just found out that my parents lost all 3 of the lawsuits against them, and they will have to repay the individuals they borrowed money from in the next months. I suppose this is terrible for them, but it's fantastic for me. Hearing that made me very pleased. My parents began complaining very immediately about how I had completely destroyed them and that they would never have any money left over once they retired. So naturally, my relatives were the ones who told me about this. They continue to blame me for this, rather than admitting and embracing the fact that this is only a result of their own behavior. The amount of mental acrobatics needed to get such a conclusion is beyond my comprehension. Following all of the events that have occurred, though my brother was the golden kid, I always knew that I was the center of their world, so it's not unexpected. In all of their stories, they constantly sought to denigrate me and make me the bad guy. For all the wrong reasons, I suppose they're taking full advantage of this chance to be the talk of the town. Regretfully, they are unaware that this is a bad thing, and no one feels any pity for them. The only thing they want is attention. It doesn't matter to them where it comes from or why they get it. They only want a chance to complain to others about how hard their lives are because of me, as long as others are talking to them and about them. And now more than ever, it's clear. The 5th update. I am very excited to share this wonderful news with you all. It made me happy, and I hope it makes you happy too. Are all of you prepared for it? My brother needed to find employment. Yes, exactly. Since I've been looking forward to this day for the most of my adult life, I truly feel like the king of the world right now. The day I would witness my brother being pressured to work rather than merely play video games at home. While my brother never had to worry about any of that since he had my parents' support, I had to earn my way through college and forge my own path. However, it now seems as though our family has been given justice by the cosmos in the most exquisite and lyrical way imaginable. In order to pay for things during my time in college, I had to work as a cashier at the restaurant. I recently found out that my brother had to work as a cashier at the video game store since, as they say, revenge is best served cold. I had to drive all the way to his workplace since I couldn't believe it when I heard it. I even gave up my lunch for it, but the expression on his face as I entered the store made it all worthwhile. I love getting to go about making him feel uncomfortable and upset. Even if it was petty, I had a great time before I went. He simply snapped at me and told me to go when I even asked him whether our parents had wept on his first day of work, just like they did on his first day of school. However, I really like seeing it, and I don't believe things could be much better this year.